WIONews.com. World is one. Reporting from the line of fire is about instinct. It's about sensing the hostility.
Tear gas has been ongoing throughout the day.
You were not going to pull out of NATO.
And standing your ground for a bit longer.
A blast has happened! A blast has happened!
It's not a story of courage, but a revelation of the disguise. So you see what others can't. We on Ground Report, the edge of reportage.
I was born in Afghanistan. The Soviet invasion forced my family to migrate to Pakistan before moving to the United States. South Asia is home. Here, in the streets, on platforms like these, I am most comfortable. I'm in the studios of WION to bring to you the region's heartbeat. On South Asia Diary, you will hear voices from the world's most underreported region. We will talk culture, we will talk politics, we will talk creative innovations. This is South Asia, home to 1.9 billion people. And this is South Asia Diary with me, Mariam Wardak. Every Monday, 8:30 p.m. IST, on WION, World is One.
Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started. On this show, we take pride in reporting stories backed by data. We show you numbers and graphs. That's also how we've reported the pandemic: death toll, infections, recoveries. We have figures for everything. It's like we measure tragedies and trends. But in this last month, something has shifted. For a lot of us, these statistics have turned into names and faces we knew. Casualties have links with personal memories. So how do you report such a story? That's the dilemma we face every day, to keep personal emotions aside and bring you as factual an account as possible of the events around us. To document failures and apathy, governments and systems have fallen short by a lot. You need a social media influencer today or a senior contact in the administration to manage a hospital bed. And if you get it, there's no guarantee the medical supplies will last. More than the paucity of resources, it's the poison of politics that is killing people. And when things look the darkest, we also saw rays of hope. India's partners and friends stepping up with offers of help. Last year, when countries struggled around the world, India gave them medicines and supplies. India shared life-saving vaccines. The government faced a lot of flack at home. Critics said it should prioritize Indians. But this pandemic, we know, is global, and its response must also be global. And we're seeing proof of it again. India's vaccine Maitry is paying off. On Gravitas tonight, as we report on the devastating second wave, we look at how help is pouring in from the most unexpected quarters. Also on the show, if you think a pandemic is no time to spend money on missiles, think again. Global military spending surged in 2020 and a lot of it had to do with China. In Saudi Arabia, a new step towards inclusiveness. Schools will now teach Indian epics like Ramayana and Mahabharata. The decision, we are told, comes from the Crown Prince himself. In Iran, a leaked audio tape could lead to a political explosion. It shows how the various turf wars ail the foreign policy in the Islamic Republic. And why is China censoring the Oscar-winning Chinese origin director who is making history and being celebrated worldwide? We'll tell you her story. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Family members of the crew of a sunken Indonesian submarine mourn the passing of their loved ones after the country's military announced all 53 on board had died. French energy giant Total has confirmed it is suspending work on a massive $20 billion gas project in northern Mozambique following the latest jihadist assault on a nearby town last month. Turkish prosecutors order the arrest of 532 suspects, including 459 serving military personnel in an operation targeting people linked to a Muslim cleric, who Ankara says was behind a 2016 attempted coup. Israel's decision to remove barricades from a plaza outside of Jerusalem's Old City set off joyous celebrations by dozens of Palestinians outside Damascus Gate. The placing of the barriers were seen as the immediate spark for the current round of unrest. NASA's mini-helicopter Ingenuity successfully completes its third flight on Mars, moving farther and faster than ever before, with a peak speed of 6.6 feet per second. Ukrainian President-resident Volodymyr Zelensky visits the Chernobyl exclusion zone to commemorate the 35th anniversary of the world's worst nuclear disaster. Ukrainians lit candles and led roses to commemorate those who died after the 1986 Chernobyl nuclear disaster during a ceremony at the memorial to Chernobyl firefighters in the city of Slavutich. A Malaysian artist was detained by police late on Friday for allegedly insulting the country's queen by making a Spotify playlist that mocked comments on the queen's Instagram account. An arrest condemned by rights groups as a clampdown on free speech.
The Oscar goes to Chloe Zhao.
At the 93rd Academy Awards, Nomadlands wins the top prize of the best film as its director Chloe Zhao makes history by becoming the first woman of color to bag the Best Director award, and the film's lead, Frances McDormand, bags the Best Actress award. Anthony Hopkins becomes oldest ever acting Oscar winner after taking Best Actor for The Father over late Chadwick Boseman in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. 5 players have pulled out of the ongoing Indian Premier League due to mounting COVID cases in India. The Bangalore duo of Adam Sampa and Kane Richardson have joined fellow Australian Andrew Tye of Rajasthan in withdrawing from the lucrative tournament, over fears of not being able to return home from India due to the worsening situation here. Indian star R. Ashwin has also left the Delhi Capitals to support his family in their fight against the coronavirus. Last week, England's Lyme Livingstone had pulled out, citing bubble fatigue. Stephen Curry has smashed the NBA record for the most three-pointers ever scored in 1 month. The Golden State Warriors star hit 7 threes against the Sacramento Kings, which took his tally for the month of April to 85, with 2 games still to play. The previous record of 82 three-pointers was set by James Harden while playing for the Houston Rockets in November 2019. Curry scored 37 points in all for his 30th 30-plus point game of the season as the Warriors won 117-113.
For 5 days now, India has been breaking the global record in daily infections. More than 350,000 new cases today, 350,000. More than 17 million cases since last year. We still don't know if this is the peak. India has close to 3 million active cases as we speak. More than 14 million people have recovered. That's more than 82% of the total caseload till date. In the last 24 hours alone, more than 200,000 people have recovered in India, and these recoveries are promising, but there's a lot that is not. The healthcare system is failing to cope. The shortages are proving to be deadly. Delayed medical response may be driving the toll in India. In the last 24 hours, more than 2,000 people have died. The total number of deaths in India is close to the 200,000 mark. 200,000 people. The situation is devastating. Patients are struggling for medicines, beds and oxygen. Critical patients are being turned away from hospitals because they've run out of capacity. Around the world, countries are now turning away Indian travelers. At least 20 countries and regions have imposed travel restrictions on Indians. The Maldives, Kuwait, Germany, Italy, Bangladesh, Iran and the Netherlands are among the latest countries to impose travel restrictions. What kind of restrictions are these? They range from tough quarantine measures to a complete ban on travel. So if you're planning to travel to any of these countries, check again. And while some doors have shut, many others have opened. The world has come forward to help India. At least 13 countries have offered supplies and assistance. And while most offers should be welcome, some need to be examined more closely. Let's start with the first movers, countries like Singapore. They saw India in crisis and enabled the transfer of much-needed oxygen supplies, no strings attached. Last week, 4 cryogenic oxygen tanks were airlifted from Singapore. A plane of the Indian Air Force was sent to fetch the supplies. More medical supplies are expected in the coming days, like oxygen concentrators and ventilator machines. Then we have Saudi Arabia. It sent across a shipment of 4 cryogenic tanks with 80 metric tons of liquid oxygen, and this transfer happened in cooperation with 2 private companies. Meanwhile, many other countries have stepped up to help. Reports say medical support from France, the UAE, Denmark and Israel has begun flowing in. Today, the Indian Air Force airlifted 7 empty oxygen cylinders from the UAE. Well-known buildings in Dubai, like the Burj Khalifa, lit up in the colors of the Indian flag yesterday with the message, "Stay strong, India." The United Kingdom is sending a major shipment, including 600 pieces of medical equipment like ventilators and oxygen concentrators. The first batch is expected to arrive on Tuesday. France has promised to provide India with quote-unquote significant extra oxygen. Reports say this will include oxygen ventilators as well. Assistance is also expected from the European Union, from Japan, Russia, Australia and Canada too. And as the rest of the world swung into action, the US and Germany also woke up. 2 countries who until 2 days back showed no concern for India. After a stumbling initial response, they have now offered to help. The United States faced a strong backlash for blocking vaccine raw materials to India. Then US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan spoke to his Indian counterpart, Ajit Doval. And there was a clear shift. This is what America's statement said after the conversation. Just as India sent assistance to the US as our hospitals were strained early in the pandemic, the US is determined to help India in its time of need. Clearly, the Biden administration was red-faced after its initial response. So on Sunday, all key members of the US administration, from President Joe Biden to Vice President Kamala Harris to US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, and even the American Surgeon General, posted messages of support. In Europe, Chancellor Angela Merkel made a shift too. This is German Chancellor Angela Merkel. On Friday, we told you how she'd issued a warning to India. She wanted Europe to rethink medical supplies from India if India fails to export due to its own rising caseload. But on Sunday, Merkel expressed solidarity with India. She promised a mission of support. German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas said that Germany is racing to get oxygen and medical supplies to India.
Angela Merkel announced that we will urgently work on an assistance mission. The German government is now urgently evaluating what kind of assistance can be provided, such as oxygen, equipment, ventilators, medicine.
Da kommen in Frage Sauerstoffanlagen, Beatmungsgeräte, Medikamente.
So despite the initial speed bumps, India's partners are now offering help. And this is also the result of the goodwill that India developed during the pandemic. In the initial days, India sent medicines to more than 100 countries. Then when vaccines were ready, India shared them with the world. The government faced flack at home. But India believed that this was a global pandemic which needed a global response. So the help continued, and all of it is now paying off, which brings us to China. Last week, we told you that Beijing had extended assistance to New Delhi, and not surprisingly, China's actions are yet again the opposite of its words. This is what has happened. China's state-run carrier, Sichuan Airlines, has suspended all cargo flights to India for the next 15 days. Why does this matter to India? Because this could lead to a major disruption. We are talking about cargo flights. They were supposed to get medical supplies. Efforts were on to procure much-needed oxygen concentrators and other medical supplies from China. Now, all of it will come to naught because China's state-run airline has stopped flights to India. And that's not all. Chinese manufacturers were trying to profit from India's desperation. Let me show you a report. It says Chinese manufacturers jacked up their prices by 35 to 40%. Even freight charges were increased by more than 20%. Like I said, none of this comes as a surprise. China had supplied India with faulty testing kits last year. This year, it is trying to profit from India's crisis and blocking supplies while promising help. Good thing nobody was counting on them for it. And now let me tell you the story of India's suffering. 352,000 new cases, more than 2,800 deaths in 24 hours, a critical shortage of oxygen and hospital beds, a long waiting list for last rites, and never-ending SOS calls. The crisis has overwhelmed our health infrastructure. The centre and states are struggling.
Over 17 million cases. 195,000 deaths and counting. The COVID-19 situation in India remains grim. It's a devastating reminder of what the virus can do if left unchecked.
We're deeply concerned about the increasing number of cases and deaths in India right now. We know that the situation is complex and requires different responses in different parts of the country.
On Monday, India reported 352,000 plus new cases, the highest single-day spike for the 5th consecutive day. The tally of total active cases has now reached 2.8 million. 2,812 deaths have also been registered in the last 24 hours. This is the highest spike for the 6th consecutive day. Till date, over 14 million people have recovered from the virus. 141 million doses of vaccines have been administered. But there's still work to do.
कोरोना हम सभी के धैर्य, हम सभी के दुख बर्दाश्त करने की सीमा की परीक्षा ले रहा है। बहुत से अपने हमें असमय छोड़कर चले गए हैं।
The crisis has overwhelmed the health infrastructure. The situation is particularly alarming in Maharashtra, Uttar Pradesh, New Delhi, Karnataka, Chhattisgarh, and Kerala. These 6 regions contributed to 64% of new cases in April. In the national capital, there's a desperate rush for oxygen as supplies run out. In search of treatment, families are ferrying their kin from hospital to hospital.
I don't know what government is doing. But then we can do it. Then why can't government not doing?
Same story in Ahmedabad, the capital of Gujarat. Hospitals are running out of beds. Patients are lining up outside hospitals. They're waiting to be admitted, carrying their own limited supply of oxygen.
We have brought the oxygen on our own. The treatment has started, but we don't know what time our number will come to get inside the hospital. There's a huge line of patients waiting.
In Mumbai, the financial capital of India, oxygen refilling plants are running dry due to short supply. Those in need are returning disappointed and empty-handed. India is gasping for oxygen. In New Delhi, makeshift crematoriums are being set up. There's still not enough to cope with the influx of victims. There is now a waiting list for last rites. It extends from several hours to 2 days. The Indian Railways have become the nation's lifeline. Oxygen express trains are running across the country. In some places, train coaches have been turned into isolation wards. But in the near absence of repositories for available supplies, social media platforms have become virtual command centers, ground zero for distress calls. On Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, ordinary Indians are going out of their way to help each other. Influencers are amplifying SOS calls. Their solidarity and promptness is moving. It is also proof of a monumental failure, the failure of a system to provide basic healthcare facilities when pandemic strikes. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
So that's the situation in India: shortages, death, and panic. In times like this, global support counts for a lot, and India demonstrated this last year. Hospitals in the West were swamped. They had no PPE kits, no masks, no medicines. It was India that came to their rescue. This year, we are seeing a role reversal. India's caseload is steadily rising. But on the other side of the world, things are improving. Europe and America are emerging from the pandemic, so naturally you would expect them to repay the favor. Instead, we got snarky remarks and delays. The United States was the most curious case. Washington kept talking about the importance of US-India ties. At the same time, they were withholding critical raw materials. This action had consequences. Without raw materials from the US, Indian vaccine makers could not expand output. But the State Department saw things differently. They came up with the most bizarre defense. When asked about the embargo, listen to this.
So India is currently facing a horrible surge in coronavirus infections, and we reported that they've asked the United States to lift a ban on the export of vaccine raw materials, which basically threatens to slow the country's vaccination drive. When will the administration decide on that?
So we've addressed this a couple times in the briefing. As I've said, this is a question for USTR.
The State Department believes getting Americans vaccinated is a global priority. Talk about superiority complex. The US may be a superpower, but its people are not a super species. So there's no reason why Americans deserve the jab more than the people in Asia or Africa or Latin America do. That's exactly what the US was doing until this weekend, hoarding vaccines, blocking raw materials, and telling the world it's in their best interest. Criticism followed, and America changed tack. You see, countries like the US play to the gallery. And in the last few days, the world's attention has turned to India. Every major newspaper was carrying the story. People started talking about America's embargo and its selfishness. So the tone changed. Suddenly, Joe Biden remembered how India had helped his country last year. This is what the president tweeted on Monday. Just as India sent assistance to the United States as our hospitals were strained early in the pandemic, we are determined to help India in its time of need. America has finally relented. It is poised to send ventilators, PPE kits and vaccine raw materials to India, but it shouldn't have been this hard. Since Biden imposed the embargo, India has added 6 million new infections. 6 million. Nearly 40,000 deaths. The fact is, when India needed the US, it vanished. And now that the world is watching, it is eager to help. Hardly the actions of an ally, let alone a friend. So what's the lesson here? Was India wrong in depending on other countries? Has the spirit of globalization failed the test of tragedy? The biggest takeaway is this: there is no substitute for self-reliance. Even the champions of globalization are dabbling in vaccine nationalism. They're shutting borders and stocking vaccines. India did the exact opposite. It gifted millions of doses to neighbors, took on the mission of vaccinating Africa and Europe. In hindsight, critics may question the wisdom, but hindsight, we say, is a dangerous place to dwell. India can be proud of its vaccine diplomacy. The rest of the world is responding in kind now. At the same time, the lesson is clear. India must build its own arsenal. Because when the next tragedy strikes, things will not be any different. The US and Europe will still put their own citizens first. And for the record, many Indian firms are supplying raw materials for Pfizer and Moderna. Now, this is not something many are reporting. New Delhi could have leveraged this. It chose not to. India did not stop the export of vaccine raw materials. Well, this is the language America understands, the language of power and arm twisting. And quite frankly, we should not be surprised. The US has repeatedly failed when India has sought help. This was not a handout. India was buying raw materials for vaccines. American companies were being paid for these supplies. Now look at some instances in history. In the 1990s, Americans refused to share the cryogenic technology for space missions, so India got down to building its own. It was not easy work. There were multiple setbacks on the way, but in the year 2017, India's homegrown cryogenic engine was tested successfully. Here's another instance. This is from 1999 during the Kargil war. Pakistani troops had taken up strategic positions. India requested GPS data from the region. Now, GPS could have been a game changer in Kargil, but we will never know because the US government denied India's request. 2 decades later, India has its own GPS. It is called the Navik system. Experts say Navik is even more accurate than GPS in the Indian subcontinent. What we are trying to say is this: India has thrived in adversities. Some of our finest moments have come amid hardships. The Wuhan virus pandemic should be no different. A post-pandemic India must target self-reliance in public health. For a country with 1.3 billion people, pandemics are a bigger threat than wars. And India is now the global epicenter of this pandemic. It doesn't look like things will improve in a hurry. Today, the Indian government issued a warning. An official said that the time has now come for you to start wearing a mask at home, where you share common spaces with your family members. Listen to this.
बल्कि अब मैं कहना चाहूंगा कि सीधा टाइम आ गया है कि घर में हम वैसे ही अब मास्क पहनना शुरू करें। हम बाहर की बात करते थे, लेकिन संक्रमण जैसे है ज्यादा है तो घर में भी बाई चांस किसी को आ गया है तो जहां तक हो गए घर में भी जब हम किसी के साथ बैठे हैं तो मास्क लगाएं तो फायदा है। लेकिन डेफिनेटली अगर कोई पॉजिटिव है उसको भी मास्क लगाना है, बाकियों को भी लगाना है, उसको दूसरे कमरों में रखना है।
As we said, it doesn't look good. What about the rest of the world? How are they faring? The virus is still mutating and spreading the world over. Countries are still trying to keep up with it. Our next report brings you up to speed with 5 major developments of today.
More than 147 million infections worldwide. But the Wuhan virus is not done yet. The virus is mutating into dangerous variants. The latest one has been found in Sri Lanka. It spreads very fast and can remain airborne for nearly an hour. It began spreading rapidly after last week's New Year celebrations. Younger people are getting infected in larger numbers. Experts fear a third wave. The next 2 to 3 weeks will be critical. As the surge continues, a new study has found that pregnant women and newborn children face higher risks. The study was conducted by the University of Oxford. It found that women who test positive during pregnancy face high risk of complications. They are over 50% more likely to experience premature birth, pre-eclampsia, admission to intensive care, even the risk of death. Newborns, too, are nearly 3 times more at risk. The world's best bet are vaccines. But we don't have enough of them. The World Health Organization might deliver a booster shot soon. It is reviving Moderna's Wuhan virus shot. Technical experts will meet on the 30th of April to decide. So far, the WHO has approved vaccines made by Pfizer, AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson. An emergency use listing from the WHO may accelerate the adoption of the Moderna vaccine around the world. In Singapore, researchers have found promise in an old but highly controversial drug. They say that using a throat spray with anti-malarial drug hydroxychloroquine can reduce the spread of the virus. Researchers tested their hypothesis on more than 3,000 migrant workers. They found that using the 2 drugs cuts the spread of the virus in high transmission settings, like dormitories, cruise ships, and prisons. Hydroxychloroquine, or HCQ, has been a controversial choice of treatment since last year. And finally, a story that gives hope. Italy. After 6 months of rotating lockdowns, Italy is unlocking again. Restaurants are serving customers again. After a major outbreak last year, the country has been in and out of lockdowns. Right-wing parties say Italy has been too cautious. Virologists disagree. They feel the lockdowns were needed, and unlocking even now might invite a new surge. Italy's vaccination program is going slow. It is missing its daily targets of 500,000 shots a day and remains limited to the elderly. As Italians say cheers, they'll have to keep their guard up. Bureau Report, World is One.
Imagine mobilizing for a war, but only arming a handful of soldiers. It's a doomed strategy, but that's exactly what the world is doing right now. Private companies have been leading the global vaccine research. Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, these were all developed by Big Pharma. Now, they alone know how to make these jabs. But here's the thing you need to know about Big Pharma. They're not guardian angels, they're mercenaries. This is an industry that is singularly focused on one thing: profits. They sell life-saving drugs for a profit. They perform life-saving surgeries for a profit. So it comes as no surprise that pharma is among the most hated industries in the world, and frankly, they deserve it right now. For decades, Big Pharma has spun money out of health crises. They do this using patents. Think of it as a glorified way of calling dibs. You have a patent for something. Only you can produce or use it. If someone else does, you can sue them. The whole idea behind patents is to protect ingenuity, but it has been misused by pharma companies. They have locked up formulas of life-saving drugs and created a profit-churning monopoly. Let me show you some examples. Humira is a drug prescribed for arthritis. It is among the most popular ones in the market. There are 132 patents protecting the makers, which means this drug is a guaranteed monopoly for at least 39 years. Then we have Lantus, a long-acting insulin used in type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Again, extremely popular in the market. There are 49 patents protecting Lantus for a period of 37 years. And both these medicines can save lives, but there's a monopoly on both of them, which means two things: higher prices and lower output. It's an unfair system. And today, it is a good day to talk about it. It's World Intellectual Property Day, a day that is supposed to create awareness on patents and trademarks and copyrights to celebrate the innovation of creators. But looking at how patents are being misused, what exactly are we celebrating? This World IPR Day, it makes more sense to criticize patents and celebrate them. They have put a price tag on human lives, and they continue to do so during this pandemic. Right from the start, patents have complicated our pandemic response. Think back to the mask shortage in 2020. Why do you think that was? because American multinational company 3M had a patent on N95 masks. So new firms could not start producing immediately. It was the same for testing. Companies patented rapid testing kits. So there was no scope for mass production. Now with vaccines, nothing has changed. The formulas are still locked away. Only a handful of companies have successfully developed vaccines across the world. Imagine if they shared their designs with the world. We could end the pandemic in weeks. But that would mean sacrificing profits. So what's the solution here? How can we sidestep patents? One option is to pool them. The World Health Organization is using this method for HIV and tuberculosis. Here's how it works. Multiple patent holders come together and form a consortium. Within this consortium, they will share patents. So now there are more producers for each medicine. You could say a patent pool is one step below open source. Another option is to do away with intellectual property rights in pharma. And this might sound impossible, but it isn't. There's a real-life example for it. The WHO's Global Influenza Surveillance and Response System. Their scientists meet every 2 years. They update each other on the developing strains. They finalize a vaccine design. The jabs are then produced in government-funded labs around the world. The bottom line is there are no private players. And this could become the future of public health. But knowing Big Pharma, they will fight back, which is where governments come in. You see, no monopoly can thrive without the state's ignorance. International law puts public health over patents. So technically, governments can force pharma companies to share their designs. But they still haven't done it. Instead, what they have done is hoard vaccines. Now, the arithmetic of vaccination is pretty simple. 2 shots per person. It should not be very tough to calculate how many shots you would need for a population. But the United States and Europe are on a buying spree, around 16% of the world population. And they've bought more than half the output. And they are just sitting on that stockpile. The US has ordered around 40 million doses of AstraZeneca's vaccine. They do not need these jabs, 40 million. Once the next shipment of Pfizer and Moderna arrive, the US will have enough shots to inoculate every adult thrice. This is a classic case of hoarding. And we often say that monopolies and hoarding kill competition, that it's not good economics. But here, it is literally killing people. So this World IPR Day, let's bring back the original motto of patents, to enrich human lives, to further human capacity. And if Big Pharma does not relent, it's time for governments to put the foot down. Ramayana and Mahabharata, 2 of the greatest epics from India, will soon be taught in the schools of Saudi Arabia. This decision has been taken under the Vision 2030 initiative of the Saudi Crown Prince. It's a big step towards inclusiveness, a significant message of coexistence, and a clear reminder of the organic relationship that India shares with the Saudi kingdom.
The land of Mecca and Medina, the birthplace of Islam, will now teach epics like Ramayana and Mahabharata in schools. This may just be the most significant step towards inclusiveness from the de facto leader of the Islamic world, and a message in coexistence to naysayers across the globe. The decision has been taken by the Saudi Crown Prince himself. It is part of Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030 for his kingdom. The announcement was made by Noof Al-Marwai, a Padma Shri awardee and the first certified Saudi Yogacharya or yoga teacher. She put out screenshots of her son's exam paper, which included questions on Hinduism and its beliefs. Soon, all schools in the kingdom are expected to adopt a similar curriculum. What will the new curriculum include? The history of Hinduism and Buddhism, the teachings of Ramayana and Mahabharata, the concepts of karma and dharma, and the importance of yoga and Ayurveda. Riyadh says it aims to create a coexistent, moderate and tolerant generation. An estimated 440,000 Hindus already live in the kingdom. This is the second biggest Hindu diaspora in the Arab world, after the UAE. In fact, Indians make the largest community of expats in Saudi Arabia. 26.3% of the total migrant population in the country is from India. On the political front, bilateral ties are stronger than ever. The respective visits by both heads of state in recent years have strengthened the traditional bond between the two countries. The relations have taken the form of a 360-degree partnership. Just this month, the Indian and Saudi Arabian navies conducted a joint exercise in the Persian Gulf. And now, as India struggles with a critical shortage of medical supplies, Saudi Arabia is shipping 80 metric tons of oxygen as a gesture of goodwill. But the decision to include Hindu epics in its school curriculum is the ultimate proof that the friendship India and Saudi Arabia share is organic, not cosmetic. Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
Have you ever wondered what our world leaders discuss behind closed doors? Those conversations rarely leave the room. But what happens when they get out? Usually it doesn't end well. The Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif seems to be the latest victim of such a leak. An audio tape has come out where Zarif, the foreign minister, allegedly claims that he is not in control of the foreign policy and it's the Revolutionary Guards who call the shots. And that efforts were underway to sabotage the Iran nuclear deal. Our next report brings you a glimpse of the power struggles in Iran.
It's a leak that couldn't have come at a worse time for the Iranian government.
The entire control of no policy should be in the hands of one person only. Policy of the battlefield must also be dependent on the country's strategy, but it has not been as such. Policy of the battlefield has been the determinant of the country's policy.
That voice belonged to this man, Mohammad Javad Zarif, the foreign minister of Iran. What you heard him say was this: the Revolutionary Guards dictate the foreign policy of Iran. It's the foreign minister himself saying he's not the one in charge. It's an explosive tape. It surfaced on Sunday and lifted the veil of secrecy that covered the Iranian government. Perhaps for the first time, the world has insights into the turf wars within the Islamic Republic. The audio is said to have been recorded in March. That's when the Iranian foreign minister spoke to an economist. Of course, it wasn't supposed to leak, but now it has, and no one knows who was behind this leak. The tapes reveal how restricted Zarif feels in office. In his own words, his decisions are dictated either by the Revolutionary Guards or the Supreme Leader himself. In this part of the tape, the Iranian foreign minister reveals how he was undermined by Qasem Soleimani, the former commander of the elite Quds force, the man who was killed in an American operation last year.
For example, hold off on carrying out some operation for a while until I can do my job. But almost each time that I went for talks, it was Martyr Soleimani who asked me to get a concession or point in regional talks.
Zarif doesn't stop there. He later narrates how Soleimani was working to sabotage Iran's nuclear deal with world powers by working with Russia and by ramping up the Iranian intervention in the Syrian civil war.
In the last week that led to the signing of the JCPOA, Russia did its best to prevent reaching a deal, and that's why the Russian foreign minister was absent on the stage. He would tell me to demand a list of items from Lavrov when I went for talks with him. He wanted diplomacy to be spent on what he wanted to do in Idlib for the Shiites. These were sacred goals, though. I am not trying to deny it.
These revelations come at a critical time for Iran. Tehran has resumed negotiations to revive the nuclear deal. As the presidential elections approach, President Hassan Rouhani is fighting to stay in power. But he faces a challenge from the hardliners. Iran now claims these tapes are illegal and selectively edited. But they will make life difficult for Rouhani and his government, both at home and outside. Bureau Report, World is One.
The Oscar Awards ceremony was held today, and they make headlines for who won and who lost. But we'd like to focus on something else, a speech that is going viral, a speech by Tyler Perry that urges everyone to refuse hate. It couldn't have come at a better time. Listen to this.
Tyler, I know you never do what you do for thanks, but I'm grateful for the countless ways you work to make ours a better world. It is my honor to present to you the Jean Herschel's Humanitarian Award.
I refuse to hate someone because they are Mexican or because they are black or white or LGBTQ. I refuse to hate someone because they are a police officer. I refuse to hate someone because they are Asian. And I want to take this Jean Herschel Humanitarian Award and dedicate it to anyone who wants to stand in the middle. No matter what's around the wall, stand in the middle, because that's where healing happens. That's where conversation happens. That's where change happens. It happens in the middle. So anyone who wants to meet me in the middle, to refuse hate, to refuse blanket judgment, and to help lift someone's feet off the ground, this one is for you too. God bless you, and thank you, Academy. I appreciate it. Thank you.
On that wonderful note, it's a wrap. We're leaving you as always with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching.